Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the STP training webinar, Fast Start Your Test Automation. Our speaker for the day is Jim Trentadue. I'm Smita Mishra, and I'm excited to host you all and Jim on our STP trainings. Before we get started with Jim, I wanted to quickly share with you some information for all the testers who have joined us. I would like to believe that since you are here, you're likely to be interested in learning automation skills and its implementation in testing. So we have our conference, Spring 2017 STPCon, coming up in Phoenix, Arizona from March 14th through 17th this year. So overall, we have about 4 workshops and 14 sessions spanning across various formats, which are case studies, hands-on exercises, and tool demos. These are some of our key workshops and sessions that we have at the conference, and there are many more. So in case you have not signed up yet and would like to do so, please use the discount code FASTSTART as shown on the screen to avail 15% off your registration fees. Be sure to check out www.stpcon.com, where you can learn more about the conference, the speakers, our special events, and the conference pricing. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is @SoftwareTestPro on both of these social networks. All right, so let's get started with the webinar today. We are very happy to have Jim with us. Jim has more than 17 years of experience as a coordinator and manager in the software testing field. Jim's various roles in testing have focused on test execution, automation management, environment management, standards deployment, and test tool implementation. In the area of offshore testing, he has worked with multiple large firms on developing and coordinating cohesive relationships. As a speaker, Jim has presented at numerous industry conferences, chapter meetings, and at the University of South Florida for their software testing class, where he mentors students on the testing industry and discusses trends for establishing future job searches and continued training. So before I hand over the control to Jim, a few housekeeping points. All the attendees shall remain muted through the webinar. You can type in your questions and share with us through your question or chat box, whichever is visible to you. We shall take them up after Jim is done with his presentation. The webinar shall be recorded and posted on the softwaretestpro.com site for the attendees to go through them later. All right. So Jim, I'm going to now hand over the presentation to you. So let's get started with it.
All right, thank you, Smita. Thank you for that introduction. All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. My name is Jim Trentadue, and I am a software quality consulting director. And I'd first like to ask, for those here, can you hear me okay, and can you see my screen okay? I just want to get any kind of confirmation. If you could just send it in the chat window, that would be fantastic. Great. All right, thank you very much, everyone. All right, so today we're going to talk about fast starting your test automation. So the agenda today is we're going to talk about two different things on how to get this started quickly. And so as we all know, an old adage, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And we're going to see different points throughout this presentation where we're actually going to slow down a little bit, and then other points we're going to speed up very quickly. All with the goal to try to get very fast at some point. So first we're going to talk about the setup and inputs. Identify those. We're going to talk about the planning and execution. We're going to talk about fine-tuning our tests and our data. We're going to go into the reporting and analysis section, and then we'll recap this presentation. So let's start with the setups and inputs. All right, so let's talk about the setup here. We need a knowledge base. So right off the bat, before you get into anything, just know you have to have some kind of central repository to collect all this information, whether you're using a test management system, whether you're using some kind of SharePoint site, whatever it may be. Have some kind of knowledge base where everything can be there and quickly adjusted, changed, anything that has to happen. So let's take a look. We have systems. So with our systems, we're going to build out our tests, and we're going to capture things. So I'm going to go into what capture means in a little bit more, but we want to be able to capture things at this point. Then we have our applications, which we're going to, after we're doing our application tests, we're going to be doing some kind of test review. And we're going to compare to see when we ran our test, how did that work against the previous run? Did that pass? Did that fail? And what were the differences? So let's start to build our foundation. All right, ready? Let's automate. Well, wait a minute. Slow down a minute. Before we want to get to automation, we're all anxious to get there. We have a couple more legs of the pyramid that we have to build out to make sure that automate, ready, set, automate is supported. First is the planning aspect. And with this, we want to get our test steps with our screenshots on those UI controls. So really, it's making sure that we're capturing the right steps on the right element, and our tool is working just fine. Again, whether you're using commercial, open source, doesn't matter at this point, but you want to make sure that you're doing good capture of your elements and good capture of your steps. So when I referred to those things as things, that's what that meant, the test steps and your test controls. So execution, from a review, we want to see quickly a side-by-side result. Here's my expected, here's my actual. What were the differences? Did it work as expected? So I can quickly analyze. That would be the ideal situation, to have some kind of side-by-side analysis. So while we have our pyramid built, what's the key of this? We're going to collect. So with all our capturing that we're doing, with the comparisons that we're doing, we're going to collect our test steps, build those into cases. We're going to collect the test logic within the automated scripts that we want to. We want to collect the test data and the results. We need to collect these, and I have that little database icon here, collect this all into one central repository, which is going to be built on that quality management platform. So to get started on that quickly, slow down and make sure you have a quality management platform, something that you can put this all in, because now every iteration through this is going to be much, much faster. Let's talk about inputs for a minute. All right, so as I want to fast start my automation, I have some manual test cases. I got business processes documented. Can I go right to automation? Well, let's take a look at that. So you may have some previous automation done that was coded, maybe some legacy that was turned over. We have some manual regression tests, and we have some business scripts. So we got all of those three that kind of come together to build some kind of inputs into our test automation scripts. So we first need to collect the captured steps and organize these into logical cases. There's no promise that there's going to be a one-to-one correlation for your manual test case to an automated test case. In fact, it probably is better that you don't have it. Your manual test case may have been written with automation in mind, very possible, but if not, it's meant to just have this as a collective set of steps and let the test automation engineers and analysts do it that they want to and build it in that kind of modular format. We need to compare the results and update quickly. So we want to be able to see side by side, this failed, this control moved over, this control is a different name, this data is different. What do we need to do so we can update or report quickly? And that's where that side-by-side comparison is going to come in. But if you take a look at all these are three key inputs that come into building our automation tests. Again, just serving as input to collect this all and then organize these as we want. Let's talk about planning and execution now. So from a planning aspect, we're concentrating on capturing the accurate test steps. So we have our system under test. Again, we'll look at this little diagram here, or this little pictorial, where we have our test build and we're capturing things, and we identify those things as test steps and test objects. With our system, we need to navigate. So we need to navigate our manual tests, not cases. At this point, I'm just concerned about navigating through my application, capturing the tests, and that's it. We can build the cases later, but again, from an automation perspective, if you are doing some kind of record and playback, which is a very, very viable solution to do, make sure that you're capturing the right steps. We want to organize these into test case buckets. System, integration, UAT, whatever you may have, functional tests. From here, once we have them in these buckets, we can start to build our modular building blocks. We may use the same test in system that's in integration, maybe something that's also applied in UAT, but we build these in different modular blocks. From a capture perspective, we want to capture those test scenarios, make sure that that's our functional coverage at that point. And we also want to capture the business processes. So these are two key elements that we want to make sure we're capturing with our navigation and our organization. All right, so let's talk about running the recorded tests. With our application under test, we're going to be reviewing this and comparing these results. Replay, record and playback. Whether you're using open source, commercial, does not matter. The framework, this is not talking about the framework to be built. When I asked so many test professionals, test automation professionals, record and playback was the quickest way to capture those steps from the manual test perspective to get those into the automation engineer's hand. This is a much better solution than just using documented manual test cases that the engineer is going to have to transpose. It's going to be much easier for them to work with any kind of script and any kind of data from that perspective as opposed to just some flat text. All right, and now we're going to go in our test review. So let's do some assessment. Did our application change? Well, did the object's name change, or did the location of the controls change? And really, at the time when we were running it, was the form fully loaded with all of the objects? This is definitely a consideration if you're using geographical testing teams in various locations. That absolutely is a key consideration. Finally, to compare, let's do a side-by-side. Baseline versus actual. Let's highlight and mark up what changed. So something to tell me, hey, by the way, from our first run, this changed from my last run. It may not be a defect, it may just be informational, but I want to highlight that to you quickly so you can take action on it if you want to report on it or not. So again, another case of slowing down just a little bit to make sure we add in that consideration to highlight and mark up on a screen and then say what changed. All right, so in our tests and data here, let's plan our basis for evaluating subsequent runs. This is where everyone can do automation wonderful the first time, and maybe the second time it'll run. But how bulletproof and how sustainable did you make your automation to run repeatedly each and every time that does not require hours and hours of maintenance? Some things to consider in here is conditional execution. So let's put some logic into our test suite, and I'll give an example of that in a second. Automation patience. Recognize the page object and readiness. So if we have a flaky application, I'll say, that sometimes it returns good, sometimes the performance is bad, and not even a load and stress test at this point, just general performance of your servers, maybe of your application layer, anything. But let's talk about when that page and those objects are ready. Let's analyze the full content of the page. All right, let me give an example of some of these. Just I wanted to make sure I covered the point, and now I'm going to let that soak in for a second. Now I'm going to go into each one of these. Let's look at this example for conditional logic. If we have, from an automation perspective, if we have the process order test case pass, we're going to have our automation execute the confirm order test case. But if process order test case doesn't pass, then we need to go back to the execute edit order and look at some changes on what needs to be done. What does patience mean? I clicked on the submit button, but it's not enabled. So I'm trying to click on it from the automation perspective, but it's not ready for me to click on. Do I add delays in there? Do I add wait fors? How long and how often? These are key considerations that you want to make sure you adjust your timeout settings properly, because every time this is going to change, and especially if you're working with automation in halfway around the world, this could be a killer, because the automation teams running this from 4,000 miles away may have very different results and have to add in all kinds of delays and wait fors if they're not able to either tunnel into your environment, or if they're just trying to get general access. If their network latency is bad, this will be the bane of your existence. Full analysis. Let's learn everything on the form and the page the first time. Let's learn everything. We want to automate controls. We want to be ready to add the automation controls, and even though we didn't test on them, you may have a page that has 50 controls on it, but your first go around has 20 testing 20 of them, and that's okay. Now let's go back, but we at least have those objects identified, so we can just write a test against that control. The object has been identified. Half of the test has been done because the object has been clearly identified with some good consideration. How do we fine-tune this data? So planning our data strategy is equally crucial. So we have variable data. This is a key principle that I always emphasize with any automation discussion I have. It's static test conditions with dynamic data. Data privacy. So sensitive data, we have to have zero exposure to that. So this is a key consideration now in a lot of automation solutions, that if we don't have that masked data and the reports just say, hey, I clicked on John Smith in 123 Main Street and it's exposing all this data that should not be, this is going to fail an audit very quick. Data management, be the master of your test database. That's yours. You own the data. We have people helping us provide service to it, but this is what we own. So examples here. We're executing scenarios with variable data sets. It does increase the chance of uncovered app defects. If we're running the same test condition with the same test data, that's, in some situations, that is going to be more important to use than dynamic data. But every now and then, for certain conditions, I would like to use dynamic data just to see if it may uncover some different defects. But I still know I'm testing the same condition. So for the sensitive data, the regulatory must have data compliance. Scrambling method is preferable, but we need to extract for auditing purposes. Next, we have our data management. We build better indicators of golden data dates. So if we can set our environment that we have this golden data set refreshed from March 1st. Let's use today's data as a great example. This is the first of the month, so a lot of year-end processes, month-end processes that may have gone on. This is when we've refreshed our data. We're going to, as soon as we're testers, as soon as we get this environment, we're going to dirty up this data. So let's have a date of March 1st that we can always roll back to. On March 6th, we can roll back to the March 1st date, and we know the data that's expected. This is where that static condition with dynamic data is even more critical, because it's still going to be the same condition. We just don't know what data is going to be fed into that. All right, finally, reporting and analysis. Let's look at the different levels of information to focus on. We have a failure in our application. What does that mean? Was it a failure in my tests? Or was it a failure in my application under test? Two very different scenarios we have to analyze. So for failure, tests or application. For our tests, navigation, was it the environment? Application under test, bad data, new build. All right, this is walking through exactly how you should be thinking about this. First, a failure. Your first indication, you have to look at your test scripts. make sure it's not that before you report inadvertent defects to the development team. So the first thing I'm going to check, as soon as I see a failure, I'll check my navigation. So this, if there's anything, this screen is critical to make sure that, this slide is critical to make sure you're following it in this kind of structured format. My navigation checked okay. No new screens. My step flow is intact. All right, navigation seemed to be okay. My environment checked okay. There were no errors, and the servers were up the whole time. So I feel pretty good about my tests, that they worked fine. My application under test, the data checked okay. There was no database refresh, and all the variable data that our teams have added into the environment, we didn't add any bad data, so that seems to be checked out okay. Oh, but there's a new build in QA. There's an error. There was a new deployment, and the objects have changed. So the underlying objects, we might be working with these wonderful things called dynamic IDs in automation. And in every automation, you say dynamic IDs, every automation engineer will smile because they know that they have to do work to make it work with dynamic IDs. They have to do some labor here to get this going. So our object did change. The navigation worked, but for some of the objects that we were working with, those have changed. So this is, we're going to flag this as an error with our application under test. May or may not be a SAV 1, but more if we want to get our automation going, yeah, then it has to be worked pretty quickly. So the analysis portion here, we're going to drill down to get to the root cause. All right, we have our application new build. Let's find that error that we just had. Ready? Let's go fix it. Well, wait a minute. Let's slow down for a second. I wanted to put that first because that's where our minds go to. We want to jump to say, how can we fix it? What's the remedy? All right, let's slow down for 1 second. This is another one of those instances that we need to slow down just a touch to speed up. Let's first talk about what was some of the root cause. All right, we have dynamic IDs in the environment. We may have some modified screens as well because of those IDs. Finally, we could have some slow response time. So these are some things that could happen with a new build. We need to make sure our object recognition and handling is done extremely well. This is really working with your development team to say, here is the element, and here's the static portion of this control that I am going to be interacting with. Build to build, Mr. or Mrs. Developer, will this be breaking? Will this be changing? So they're going to be the best ones to tell you, yes, you can latch on to this attribute. I'm not going to be changing that. That's where it's going to be really tight coordination with your development team. Let's review full content to determine the pre-run and then the post-run results. So I want to see, here's how many controls, and here's what the controls were. Here's what my screen looked like prior to run as my baseline, and when I ran it before or ran it after, here's the results. Did everything line up? Is it still matching the same? The slow response time, let's do a baseline run of the timings. So we're not, again, this is not a load and stress test per se, but we can get some at least tentative performance. If we took this test script to run 4 seconds, and then tomorrow it takes 15 seconds, well, then there's a problem. But again, I would go back through, was it a problem with my test? Maybe there was some timeout settings. Maybe there was some problems with object recognition. I don't want to pass that as a failure immediately to my application under test. But we do have to find out, why did it take 15 seconds today as opposed to 4? We do have to walk through, let's first, and that's the way we can fast start this, quickly eliminate your tests, and then get this quickly into the hands of developers. Okay, so just to recap the presentation, keeping with the fast theme. make sure you have a quality management platform as your knowledge base. That has to be critical to be able to collect and manipulate things as quickly as possible. Else you're going to have disparate systems that this is controlling this is my automation objects, this has my automation results, this has everything going on. You really want to collect this under one umbrella, and that's going to make things go quicker. But obviously, to get to that quality management platform, you may take a little time to do that. I want you to focus on the input sources for accurate and comprehensive material. So you take a look at those business cases, business scenarios, processes, your manual test cases, other automation that might be a little more legacy. Use those as input sources. Don't assume that there is a one-to-one correlation between any of those three buckets, because there probably is not. But you want to take those, yes, I'm going to take this portion of this regression test case and this portion of this code, and now I want to put those together, and that will make a better automation test case than what was there previously. It's always about improving it and getting it better. We want to capture the essence of the test, build into a category of test areas. So you may have some that are, these are my integration tests, these are my system tests. This is maybe for UAT, but we want to keep this really to the point of capturing what the test is about. Once we do that, then we can go into anything, we can move into any area, modular-wise, fine, because that's, if you really go down to the grassroots of what you need to do, capture the essence of the test. Compare and review the results for changes in the application under test or test cases. That same logic I went through. You want to make sure you're going through the various test cases to make your test scripts to make sure that these are accurate and there was no failures in there. I've had quite a number, I'm sure many automation folks have had it as well. I've had quite a number of embarrassing situations where I reported this as application defects to have a developer spend a lot of time where it was more the failure with my test script. Tune your tests data for better efficiency. It's static data with dynamic conditions. We want to look at what do we need to do to keep our golden data refreshed. And so we can have control of the environment. We know the data that's going in, but it may not be static, and that's okay. You may want to have a static environment, and for some regulatory environments, that may be the better approach. For more transactional, I would prefer to have that, again, as static data with static conditions with dynamic data. And finally, I want to enable reporting capability to analyze and correct quickly. So with that, I do want to tell you that looking at some of these sessions and workshops, for those attending the STP or if you're considering it, this is a really good selection, and these are some very good speakers in all of these. When you look at some of these, if you're using Selenium, there's Selenium classes right there. There's some that are looking at what's making automation testing successful. Hans is very well known. You have Moshe as well for advanced automation techniques. Melissa, and all of these speakers have done just a fantastic job with the automation area. So it's a really good outline of, and this is just a sample of what's there at STP. I highly recommend this conference. It's one of the better conferences you'll ever see. It is really meant for the tester. Then finally, I do want to let you know about something that I'm doing in conjunction with STP that is kicking off. I'm doing a test automation workshop just focusing on foundations and principles that's offered in a city near you. It's a structured workshop focusing on key principles of automation, hands-on exercises to reinforce learning objectives, documenting your key considerations and business case for your environment, record and playback of simple scripts you create to highlight learning, and it's going to be interactive and fun. Contact me for a city near you. I'm doing this in conjunction with STP. I'm very excited about it, and it's really meant for those manual testers making the transition to automation. For those automation professionals, this is probably going to be slightly low level for you, but for my manual testers out there really who are good, this is going to be a good situation for you. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over for some questions. Smita, do you happen to have some of
Yes.
those?
So thank you, Jim. It was an awesome webinar, very good content. So thanks for it. We do have quite a few questions. What I'm going to do is ask you a couple of them, and if we're running short on time, you can take the rest of them offline, but let me quickly ask you at least
Sure.
the top ones. So here's the first one. So it says, as part of the planning, you mentioned about good capture of elements and test controls.
Uh-huh.
And we want to just ask you to elaborate on when you say elements, it's like the exact object at the object level, or is it the field and text level from the UI side?
That's a great question. It is more the element, if we're doing UI type testing,
Mm-hmm.
I can explain both a little bit. From a UI testing perspective, yes, it is that control that you will see on the screen. So an OK button to you, what is good capture of that OK button? Are you recognizing it by its object ID, its object name, its object index, its inner text, its class name? What is a good attribute for that object and element? So when I use the phrase object and element, they're synonymous in this conversation. So that's where you want to make sure that that's captured. Just because you showed that, hey, I clicked on it fine, that doesn't mean you click on a radio button, a drop-down list box, an edit box, anything in that vein. That doesn't mean it's going to be very good and repeatable the next time around. This is where you go see, and I would use record and playback just to capture some of that. And some of the folks will see, record and playback has made a serious comeback, and it is a very good solution to do.
Okay. So, okay, so should I tell you the next one?
Sure.
Yeah. So as part of the test review, you have mentioned that so that we need to actually look at the app changes for object names and locations, and you mentioned a couple of them. And then to compare, you've said you need to compare what has changed. And when you're actually automating results, you did mention a couple of steps. What the attendee is specifically asking for is that though you mentioned the automation patience, like where you put in some details, but how do you really automate results wherein is it possible like to have hundreds of scripts and actually written to the point where they keep running without human interactions, like without human interruptions, and they are so well, the error handling and the dangling and everything is done so well that they keep running all by themselves?
Yes, great question. That is possible. Their error handling is one of the key considerations that you have to build in for automation. When I think of how many Outlook users we have out there as pretty much a default standard for your mail, when you have a meeting reminder that comes up, you have this wonderful window that pops up 15 minutes prior to as a meeting reminder. Well, if you don't have your automation error handling check in there, and you happen to be running automation, you forgot you left Outlook open, that's going to be one of those situations where automation is going to try to click on a button, and all it's going to see is the meeting reminder, and it's not going to know how to interact with those controls. So with that, it is a situation where if you the more you build out your error handling, the better is able going to be to navigate without human control. So that's taking into consideration unexpected active windows. It's taken into consideration all different kinds of permutations that if this timeout setting, if I have a failed test, what do I want to do? That doesn't mean that you want to stop the rest of your test. If your test fails at test 3 and you have 50 to do, maybe you just want to wait for it, log the error, and continue on failure. But all of this has to be built in. So this is where error handling is, you have to consider it for two things to make it run unattended. Unexpected active windows that may pop up, and then on error of your test, if this does fail, what do you want to do with that? There's going to be times if it fails miserably and horribly, you just want to stop the test because anything more could corrupt data. You don't want to proceed with that. However, you want to keep going on.
All right. I'm going to ask you one final question and probably email you the rest in interest of time, so you can take them offline. So here is the final question. Will test automation differ with level of testing? Can we make scripts for integration level and use them for system level too?
Good question. Can you repeat that one more time, Smita? I'm just trying to wrap my arms around that.
Yes. It says, will test automation differ with level of testing? Can we make scripts for integration level and use for system level too?
Yes, yes. And the way to do that is modularity. Focus on the steps, focus on building the smallest piece of automation that you can possibly do. That's all it is. As a manual test, I'm not going to write a manual test just to log in to an application. I'm not going to write a manual test that just says log in, pass, and bring me to a next screen. I'm probably going to use that as part of my overall manual test. From an automation perspective, that will probably be its own test because I can pass different data, whether it's an analyst, manager. I'm using that as an example because that's the smallest level of test that I could possibly do. Log into my application. So my login test is just that. I'm going to take that piece. I may log into my app. I'm going to call that, whether it's being fed from as a sub-step in an integration test, whether it's the kickoff of a functional test, whatever it may be. Those are the pieces regarding that. So yes, you want to make that as absolutely modular and as lowest level as you could possibly do. And this way, now you start to build this out where I can piece these together, I'd hate to say it, just like Lego blocks, to build it as low as possible. If you try to put too much into one script, then you're trying to unhook so much of this. So speeding up, you want to fast start your automation, slow down for a second, and just plan out what is going to be your modular blocks. Because in a later point of time, this will serve you incredibly well. You'll be able to put different pieces together on top of it.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for your time today.
Yes. I look forward, guys. Have a great conference, and thank you very much, everyone that attended, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jim. So everyone here, thank you. This concludes our webinar for today. Thanks everyone for joining in. Stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings which are coming soon. And if you haven't signed up yet for the conference, get out there and register. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.